September of 1943. South of Formosa, just after 2 in the morning. The sea is black glass. The sky is a deeper black above it, and the Imperial Japanese Navy moves through the darkness with absolute confidence. Convoy RO-801 has been sailing for 3 nights. 12 merchant ships, 3 destroyers, 1 tanker carrying the fuel Japan needs to keep its empire alive for 1 more month. Engines rumble softly across the waves. Men stand on decks smoking, speaking quietly, watching phosphorescence trail behind their hulls. There is no fear here. Japan's admirals have already decided the matter. American submarines are a nuisance, not a threat. Too few, too clumsy, too timid to challenge the Imperial Navy's night escorts. That belief will not survive the next 6 minutes. 17 miles to the east, beneath the waves, a steel shape moves slowly at periscope depth. The water muffles everything except the rhythmic ticking of instruments and the soft hum of electric motors. Inside the forward torpedo room of the USS Harder, sailors work with the calm precision of surgeons. Their faces are pale in the red emergency lighting. Their hands steady. Torpedo tubes 1 through 6 are loaded. Gyro set. Depth adjusted. Warheads armed. The commander, Lieutenant Commander Sam Dealey, leans close to the periscope, watching shadows on the horizon grow larger. He sees no lights, but he does not need to. The convoy's position is obvious from the faint silhouette of stacked cargo, the periodic flash of a destroyer's bow cutting through waves. Dealey's crew knows something the Japanese escort commanders do not. American submarines have changed. Silent running is keener. Torpedo tracks are cleaner. Tactics have evolved from cautious strikes to coordinated wolfpacks that stalk convoys for days. The Japanese admirals still believe submarines cannot cripple an empire. They are about to learn how fast an empire can drown. A single merchant ship appears first, massive, slow, carrying thousands of tons of rubber, metal, and rice. Behind it, a second, a third. A line of dark shapes stretching across the moonless sea. Dealey lowers the periscope. Range, perfect. Speed, enough. Defenses, insufficient. He speaks quietly to his fire control team. Everything is smooth, mechanical, inevitable. At 2:11 a.m., a sound rolls through the Harder's hull, the dull hydraulic shudder of torpedoes leaving their tubes. The men in the torpedo room feel the launch through the soles of their boots. The boat slides slightly backward as compressed air forces steel cylinders into the dark. 6 torpedoes. 6 white ghosts racing toward a convoy that still has no idea it is being haunted. The Japanese lookouts see nothing. Their doctrine tells them submarines attack during the day, not on moonless nights. Their escorts are positioned too far ahead. Their listening gear is outdated. Their crews are exhausted. They are blind in the one moment. Blindness is fatal. 40 seconds pass. Then it happens. The first explosion is not a sound, it is a force. A shockwave that tears through steel plating and rips open the hull of the lead freighter. Men on deck are thrown against railings as fire erupts from the cargo hold. Flames rise 30 feet into the sky. A second explosion follows. Then a third. The convoy begins to break apart, confusion replacing confidence. Engines roar as ships try to scatter. Searchlights snap to life, slashing the darkness in frantic arcs. The Imperial Navy has spent years perfecting surface night combat. But this enemy does not fight on the surface. The destroyers race toward the bubbles, marking the torpedo tracks. Depth charges splash into the water. Too late, too scattered, too disorganized. Dealey has already turned Harder away. The submarine slips deeper, sliding through cold water like a needle through cloth. The Japanese escorts pound the ocean for half an hour, detonating charges that shake sediment off coral ridges and blast stunned fish to the surface. But they are hitting ghosts. When dawn comes, 3 Japanese ships are gone. 2 more are burning. Hundreds of men cling to debris in oil-slick water. And somewhere beneath the waves, Harder is still watching. This is the moment Japanese admirals would later call the beginning of the end. They had not feared submarines. They had feared aircraft. They had feared American battleships. They had feared industrial power. They did not fear the long, silent killers beneath the sea. But the American strategy did not require fear. It required mathematics. Every day, a convoy sank. Japan lost steel, lost rubber, lost aviation fuel, lost the oil that powered its destroyers, lost the cargo that fed its army in China, lost months of shipping construction it could not replace. In 1943 alone, Japanese submarines sank fewer than 10 Allied merchant ships. American submarines sank 190 in the same period. By the end of 1944, U.S. wolfpacks were destroying Japanese merchant shipping faster than Japan could build new ships. Every lost freighter meant lost fuel for the Navy, lost ammunition for the Army, lost food for civilians, lost hope for the Empire. But the admirals in Tokyo refused to believe their lifeline was collapsing. They issued directives. They rotated escort commanders. They blamed individual failures. They did not realize they were fighting a weapon they did not understand. Below the waves, American submarines had become the most efficient killers in the Pacific. Above the waves, Japanese convoys continued moving along predictable routes, escorted by outdated doctrine and even more outdated faith. Dealey and the Harder were not alone. Dozens of submarines, Gato-class, Balao-class, patrolled every corridor feeding the Japanese Empire. Wolfpacks coordinated attacks by radio. One submarine forced convoys into ambushes set by another. Convoy commanders never saw the pattern until it was too late. By late 1943, every Japanese convoy sailing past Formosa sailed into an invisible minefield made of American steel. The admirals did not grasp the scale of the disaster until the numbers became undeniable. Shipbuilding output, collapsing. Oil supply, collapsing. Convoy survival rates, collapsing. Fleet readiness, collapsing. An empire built across thousands of miles of ocean had been placed on a starvation diet. And the weapon starving it was quiet, unseen, and impossible to stop. But the worst was still coming. The wolfpacks were about to grow larger. Their tactics more coordinated. Their patrol zones more aggressive. Their kill rates unprecedented in naval history. Japan had not feared submarines. Soon, submarines would become the reason Japan could no longer fight at all. By early 1944, Japanese naval intelligence had reached a quiet, desperate conclusion, one they concealed from their own admirals. Convoys were not being hunted. They were being harvested. American submarines had turned the Western Pacific into a killing ground, and every ship that sailed from Singapore or Manila or Borneo entered waters where one truth governed everything. If the Americans found you, you died. But Tokyo refused to see it. The admirals believed the problem was temporary. They blamed escort commanders. They blamed bad luck. They blamed weather. They blamed faulty sonar. They blamed everything except the truth staring back at them. Japan had built an empire on the assumption that the sea could always be crossed. They were about to learn what happens when that assumption collapses. In January of 1944, Convoy HI-40 left Singapore, carrying the lifeblood of the Japanese war machine: crude oil, aviation fuel, rubber, tin, and bauxite. Everything the empire needed to survive. Escorting them were 3 modern destroyers, veterans of the Guadalcanal campaign, crews hardened, commanders confident, doctrine unchanged. They expected submarines, but they expected them in the old pattern. Solitary attacks, 1 or 2 torpedoes, then retreat. What they sailed into instead was a coordinated, multi-submarine ambush executed with mathematical cruelty. At dusk, the sea looked calm. The horizon glowed faintly with the last breath of daylight. The convoy advanced in a tight crescent: 12 merchant ships, 1 tanker, 3 escorts. 200 feet beneath the waves, the USS Flasher tracked them in silence. American commanders had learned not to attack immediately. They waited until the convoy adjusted course, until the destroyers shifted formation, until the Japanese escorts settled into predictable rhythms. The Japanese believed they were watching the sea. They did not realize the sea was watching them. At 1943 hours, the Flasher fired 6 torpedoes at a 2-minute interval to account for the convoy's staggered movement. 3 struck the tanker. The flames that erupted were so intense, they lit the sky like a sunrise in reverse. The escorts reacted instantly, racing toward the torpedo tracks, but the Flasher had already slipped deeper, changing course, leaving the destroyers to pound empty water. 30 miles ahead, the USS Hake and USS Shad waited like wolves, intercepting a wounded animal. The Japanese commander had no idea he was sailing into a funnel. Every turn he made port, starboard, evasive zigzags tightened the geometry of his own destruction. The Hake fired next, hitting a freighter whose cargo of fuel drums turned the explosion into a chain reaction. The sea burned for half a mile. In the darkness, Japanese sailors jumped into waters coated with burning oil. Some survived until the flames reached them. Most did not. The Shad followed with a spread of torpedoes that tore through the convoy's rear ships. Echoes of metal tearing and bulkheads imploding reverberated across the night. By dawn, 7 ships were gone. The destroyers circled survivors helplessly, their depth charges exhausted, their sonar useless in the rising air bubbles and debris fields. This was not combat. This was execution. And the admirals in Tokyo still did not understand why. Japan had entered the war with one fatal assumption, that submarines were defensive weapons used to protect coastlines. They built their own boats for scouting, not sinking. Their doctrine emphasized battleships and carrier groups, not undersea warfare. The United States had embraced the opposite doctrine, one that Japan never prepared for. Submarines would not protect America. Submarines would starve Japan. Every ton of shipping sunk was not just a loss. It was subtraction from everything the empire relied on. By mid-1944, the numbers spoke more clearly than any admiral ever would. 4 million tons of merchant shipping at the start of the war. Half gone by 1943. 2/3 gone by 1944. By winter, Japan had so few operational tankers that the Imperial Navy began siphoning fuel directly from grounded training aircraft. Convoys like HI-40 were not transporting goods anymore. They were ferrying the remains of an empire toward its grave. In Tokyo, staff officers drafted new escort schedules, revised convoy routes, issued new communications procedures. None of it made any difference. American submarines no longer waited for targets. They shaped the routes. They dictated survival. They controlled the sea. When Convoy Ta 302 left Manila in August of 1944, it carried ammunition, rations, and reinforcements for the collapsing Philippine garrison. The convoy moved along the Luzon Strait, the last artery Japan could use to move resources between its southern territories and the home islands. The Americans understood this, and wolfpacks waited on both ends of the strait. At 2:15 hours, the USS Redfin sighted the convoy first. Within minutes, other submarines, Angler, Creval, Stingray, reported contact. The Japanese commander did not know it, but he was now outnumbered. For the first time in the war, submarines were coordinating in real time to overwhelm convoys. The Redfin fired a spread at the lead transport, hitting it twice. The ship's bow lifted out of the water before snapping backward like a breaking spine. When the escorts charged, they revealed their engine's acoustic signatures. The Angler used that information to calculate approach vectors. Then she struck from the opposite side. 2 destroyers sank within 20 minutes. The convoy attempted a right turn, a fatal mistake. The Stingray had been waiting for that maneuver. In under 10 minutes, she sank 2 more freighters and damaged a third, so severely it would sink at dawn. When news reached Tokyo, the admirals insisted the losses were exaggerated, The reality was worse than the reports. Japan had not merely lost ships. Japan had lost the ability to move anything. Troops could not be redeployed. Fuel could not be distributed. Rice could not reach the home islands. Ammunition could not reach forward armies. Oil could not reach the fleet. The empire had become a collection of isolated islands bleeding out quietly in the dark. Every submarine patrol was another incision. Every torpedo spread was another artery severed. Every convoy sunk was another month erased from Japan's ability to wage war. The Japanese admirals had feared carriers. They had feared battleships. They had feared air raids. They never feared submarines. But by late 1944, submarines were no longer a threat. They were the most effective weapon America possessed. And Japan had no defense left. Not against the wolfpacks. Not against the numbers. Not against the mathematics of attrition that tightened around the empire like a noose. The worst truth had not yet arrived. Soon, the submarines would not just kill ships. They would kill the empire's last hope of survival. By early 1945, the Japanese Empire was dying in the dark, and the worst part was this: most of the Admiralty still did not understand what was killing it. American submarines had achieved what no fleet, no bombing campaign, no battle could ever accomplish. They had turned the Pacific Ocean itself into a weapon, not with explosions, not with spectacle, but with absence. An empire built on shipping had lost its ships. Japan's defeat began not in fire, but in emptiness. In January, Tokyo's Logistics Bureau submitted a report that stunned even the few officers who still clung to optimism. Japan had less than 3 months of usable oil remaining. Not 3 months of combat operations. 3 months of existence. Destroyers could no longer escort convoys. Carriers could not sortie. Battleships sat at anchor, their tanks hollow. Training flights stopped completely. Even trucks on the home islands were forced to drain fuel from grounded aircraft. The empire's arteries had been cut. The blood was gone. The body was still moving, but the heart had stopped long ago. The Admiralty finally asked the question they should have asked 2 years earlier. How are the Americans sinking so many ships? The answer arrived on their desks in the form of intercepted radio logs and survivor testimonies. Whispers from sailors who had watched the ocean tear their world apart. What they described was something Japan had never prepared for. Submarines were no longer solitary hunters. They were coordinated, disciplined, relentless. A single convoy could be shadowed by 1 submarine during the day, only to be attacked by 2 more at night. Convoys were being funneled, manipulated, shepherded into killing zones. This was not warfare. This was orchestration. The wolfpacks had no faces, no lights, no presence. Just torpedo trails appearing out of nothing. Just ships vanishing in fire. Just silence afterward. Night after night, American submarines tore into convoys with mathematical cruelty. Convoy Mata 30, attempting to move troops and ammunition to Mindanao, lost 8 ships in a single hour. Convoy HI-88B, carrying fuel to the home islands, was annihilated 70 miles east of Hainan Island. Only 1 transport survived. Convoy Tama 35, escorted by 3 destroyers, was attacked by the USS Spadefish, Sunfish, and Bowfin in a coordinated strike that left bodies and burning oil spread across miles of open water. The Admiralty read these reports in disbelief. Then came the final blow, a summary drafted by the last functioning branch of Japan's shipping ministry. At current loss rates, our shipping will cease to exist as an instrument of war within 90 days. It was not a warning. It was an obituary. In April 1945, the Imperial Navy committed its final act of desperation, Operation 10. Go. The battleship Yamato, largest warship ever built, was ordered to sail on a one-way mission toward Okinawa, with barely enough fuel for a single trip. Admiral Toyota knew they were sending the ship to its death. He also knew why. The Empire had no fuel left to keep it in port. What caused this shortage? Not air raids. Not blockades. Not battles. Submarines. Silent, unseen, underestimated submarines. They had sunk so many tankers that dispatching the Yamato had become a logistical suicide pact. The giant battleship didn't just represent Japan's pride, it represented the last drops of oil Japan possessed. On April 7th, American aircraft destroyed the Yamato in less than 2 hours. But the truth, the real truth, is that the Yamato did not die under bombs. She had already died in the Luzon Strait, in the South China Sea, in the Formosa shipping lanes, where submarines sent millions of tons of oil to the bottom of the sea. The bombs merely finished what torpedoes had begun. The Admiralty finally understood, but the understanding came too late. The Empire could not feed itself, could not move troops, could not supply garrisons, could not defend the home islands, could not even operate the ships it had left. By the summer of 1945, over 80% of Japanese merchant shipping had been sunk. The stragglers that remained hugged coastlines, sailing slowly, scared of open water. Japanese sailors, who had once carried themselves with the quiet dignity of naval tradition, now boarded ships with the same expression soldiers wore before a hopeless charge. They did not expect to return. They weren't wrong. American submarines had become so confident they began surfacing to finish off crippled ships with deck guns, saving torpedoes for the next prey. Some submarines ran out of targets entirely, their patrol logs describing empty seas where bustling convoys once sailed. The Empire was starving. Factories shut down. Naval production collapsed. Army divisions on island fronts began surrendering not because of American firepower, but because no food arrived for weeks. Japan was still fighting the war, but the war had already ended for Japan. The Admiralty issued new orders: scatter the ships, split the convoys, move under cloud cover. None of it mattered. The Wolfpack simply adjusted. They adapted faster than Japan could react. They used radar, sonar, code-breaking, and long-range patrol routes to close every corridor. The sea, once the Empire's greatest highway, had become a graveyard. And that graveyard belonged to the United States Navy. On August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender, millions of Japanese citizens cried, prayed, collapsed. But among the Admiralty, the emotion was different. It was not shock. It was not disbelief. It was realization, the moment they finally acknowledged what they had refused to see. Japan had never been defeated by the atomic bombs alone. It had been defeated by mathematics, logistics, attrition, and the silent predators that cut its arteries one torpedo at a time. The submarines had done their work long before Hiroshima, long before Nagasaki, long before the Emperor's voice broke through the radio static. Japan's economy had collapsed. Japan's fleet had withered. Japan's army had become immobile. Japan's skies were undefended. Japan's cities were starving. All because the admirals never feared submarines. But the men who sailed those convoys in the darkness knew the truth long before their superiors did. They saw torpedoes streaking beneath the waves. They watched tankers erupt in towers of fire. They heard the screams of men clinging to burning wreckage. They felt the ocean swallowing their empire night after night, ship after ship, convoy after convoy. In the end, the empire did not fall in a blaze of glory. It sank quietly beneath the Pacific. And the last thing it heard was not the roar of bombers, not the thunder of battleships, not the voices of dying admirals. It was the sound of a periscope breaking the surface, a whisper of steel, a ripple in the dark, the heartbeat of a wolfpack closing in, a reminder of the truth Japan learned too late. You do not need to defeat an empire. You only need to sink the ships that keep it alive.